At the far southern edge of Texas, a great wall of limestone rises straight out of the desert, and a river has cut a slot clean through it. The cliffs stand 1,500 feet tall, so sheer and so close that the water between them falls into cool blue shadow at midday. Walk into that gap and you are walking along the line where one country ends and another begins. This is Santa Elena Canyon. We are in Big Bend National Park, in the remote southwest corner of Texas, where the Rio Grande swings in a great arc and gives the region its name. This is one of the most isolated parks in the country, a vast stretch of Chihuahuan Desert pressed against the Mexican border. And here, at the mouth of Santa Elena Canyon, the river disappears between towering walls of pale stone. The scale of this place is hard to grasp until you stand beneath it. The canyon walls climb some 1,500 feet from the water, straight up, in bands of weathered gray and gold limestone. On the right rises Mesa de Anguilla, on the American side, and on the left the Sierra Ponce, in Mexico. Between them, the Rio Grande has carved a corridor so narrow that in places you can nearly touch both nations at once. The river looks gentle here, but it is the architect of everything. For millions of years, the Rio Grande has flowed against this uplifted block of rock, and where the land slowly rose, the water cut down to keep its course. Grain by grain, it sawed through solid limestone, and the canyon you see is simply the deep groove left behind. The river is still at work today, carrying the desert silt toward the distant Gulf. The limestone itself was born underwater. More than 100 million years ago, in the age of the dinosaurs, a warm, shallow sea covered this land. Countless generations of shells and tiny sea creatures settled to the bottom and hardened, layer upon layer, into thick beds of stone. Later, deep forces in the earth lifted that old sea floor high into the sky. The walls of Santa Elena are the fossil bed of an ocean that vanished long ago. Beyond the canyon spreads the Chihuahuan Desert, the largest desert in North America, and Big Bend protects one of its wildest reaches. It is a land of lechuguilla and ocotillo, of prickly pear and creosote, baking under a fierce sun and swept by sudden storms. Rugged mountains rise like islands from the dry basins, and the horizons run for 100 empty miles. Into this severe and beautiful country, the river brings its single green thread of life. Down the center of that river runs an international boundary. The Rio Grande has divided the United States and Mexico across this stretch of desert since the treaties that ended the war between them in the 1800s. Here at Santa Elena, the border is not a fence or a wall of our making, but the moving water itself. The cliff on your left belongs to Mexico, the ground beneath your feet to Texas, and the canyon holds them together. Just upstream on the Mexican bank sits the small farming village of Santa Elena in the state of Chihuahua. For generations, the people of these border settlements have lived by the river, growing crops on its floodplain and crossing back and forth as neighbors. Far downstream lies another such village, Bequilas del Carmen, reached by a little rowboat crossing within the park. These quiet communities are a reminder that the border is also a place where two peoples meet. People have known this canyon for thousands of years. Ancient hunters and gatherers left their traces along the river long before any nation drew a line here. By the time Europeans arrived, groups the Spanish called the Chizos lived among these desert mountains, hunting, gathering, and farming small plots by the water. Their name still clings to the great range at the heart of the park, the Chizos Mountains, blue in the distance beyond the desert. Later, this country lay along one of the most feared routes on the continent. Each autumn, under the bright light of what became known as the Comanche Moon, mounted Comanche war parties rode south along the Great Comanche War Trail, crossing the Rio Grande near the Big Bend on raids deep into Mexico. The trail was so heavily traveled that it wore a broad scar across the desert. For a time, these warriors were the undisputed lords of the southern plains. The Spanish came to the Rio Grande early, tracing its length within decades of reaching the New World. But this fierce corner of the desert defeated them. They called it El Despoblado, the uninhabited land, a place too harsh and too dangerous to settle. For centuries, the Big Bend remained a blank and forbidding space on the maps of empires, guarded by its heat, its distance, and the warriors who crossed it. The desert's isolation finally broke over a strange red mineral. Near the turn of the 20th century, prospectors found rich veins of cinnabar in the hills to the west, the ore that yields quicksilver or mercury. The mining town of Terlingua boomed to life, and shafts sank deep into the rock while ranchers ran cattle, sheep, and goats across the open range. For a few decades, this remote frontier rang with the noise of pick and drill, before the ore ran thin and the desert fell quiet once more. Out of that emptied land came the idea of a park. Texans dreamed of preserving the sweeping desert, the river, and the mountains for everyone. And after years of buying up worn ranch land, the vision came true. On the 12th of June, 1944, Big Bend National Park was established, protecting more than 800,000 acres of Chihuahuan Desert wilderness. What empires had scorned as worthless was recognized at last as a treasure. Look up as you enter the canyon, for the sheer cliffs are home to one of the fastest animals alive. Peregrine falcons nest on ledges high in the walls of Santa Elena, raising their young on the very rock that towers over the river. In the diving stoop after prey, a peregrine can plunge at over 200 miles an hour. The park guards these nesting cliffs closely, and to see one knife across the gap overhead is to witness the canyon at its wildest. The desert around the canyon teems with tough and clever life. Roadrunners dash between the creosote, javelina root through the brush in bristling little bands, and coyotes trot the dry washes at dusk. Along the river's green ribbon, herons stalk the shallows and beavers work the banks. Everything here has learned to make a living from a land of little water and blazing sun, and the river is the lifeline that holds it all together. When the sun finally sets behind the Sierra Ponce, another wonder appears. Big Bend lies so far from any city that it holds some of the darkest night skies in the lower 48 states, a certified sanctuary for the stars. The Milky Way arches from wall to wall above the canyon, thousands of stars burning clear over the silent desert. Here, in one of the last truly dark places, the night sky returns in all its ancient brilliance. And so we walk in. The trail crosses a shallow tributary, climbs a short set of switchbacks, then drops to the river's edge and slips into the canyon's mouth. At once the air turns cool and still, the light goes soft and blue, and the roar of the desert fades to the gentle lap of the Rio Grande. The walls close overhead, the river slides quietly by, and for a few hundred yards you walk between two nations in the cool shadow of an ancient sea. "1,500 feet of stone, a river that carved a border, an ocean turned to cliffs, and a desert alive with falcons and stars. Santa Elena Canyon gathers all of it into a single quiet walk between two countries. Thank you for watching. Follow for more interesting people, places, and things we cover on the channel.